The Feudal Future Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Feudal Future Podcast. I'm Marshall Toplansky.
I'm Joel Kotkin.
And today we're going to be talking about space and the defense industry and how the world of space and how we protect ourselves and our allies has changed dramatically over the past 50 years or 80 years since World War II. To help us with this, we've got three wonderful guests. Rand Simberg, who is joining us for the second time on the program, is a self-described recovering aerospace engineer. His book, Safe is Not an Option, which is overcoming our obsession about safety, is getting in the way of putting people into space. Fantastic book. Rand, thanks for being here. Art Herman, who is the author of Freedom's Forge, How American Business Produced Victory in World War II. Absolute classic. Also has done a biography of General Douglas MacArthur, and his latest book, The Viking Heart, How Scandinavia Conquered the World. Fantastic book, so thank you. And we have Cameron Schiller. Cameron is CEO of a company called Rangeview, based in El Segundo, California, the Gundo. And it is all about robotics for automating American factories and the American defense industry. And we're just delighted to have you here, Cameron. So for the three of you, welcome. Joel, why don't you kick us off with the first question?
Yeah, I'd like to start maybe with you, Arthur, just because to give a little bit of a historical perspective also, because if we show this to our class, any history would be positive. What are we in a crisis today in terms of defense and technology, like what we were faced in the period of Freedom's Forge? Are we further behind now than we were in terms of Japan and Germany in 1940?
Sure. First of all, let me just say, very pleased to be here with you guys and be part of the show and to be able to share some thoughts with Rand and Cameron and all this. I would put it this way. I think the situation that we faced in 1940, when President Roosevelt realized that if the war that was happening in Europe were to spill over into the Atlantic and across the Atlantic and affect the United States directly, that the kind of mechanized warfare that was being played out in Europe now with Hitler's Panzer divisions, the Blitzkrieg, the use of close air support, air power, that these were all military technologies way beyond what the U.S. military was capable of meeting. And when George Marshall, who was then chief of staff for the Army, told Roosevelt, look, if Adolf Hitler decided to land 5 divisions on the American East Coast, there's nothing we could do to stop him. He could basically roll on into the middle of the country if he wanted to. There would be no way to interfere with it. You know, at that point, we had the 19th largest military in the world. You know, Hungary had a bigger army than we did. The Netherlands did until Hitler overran it. And the only way in which the United States would have been able to sort of meet the challenge of a mass mechanized warfare of the kind that Germany was engaged in Europe, the kind that Imperial Japan was unleashing in China, would be if the United States found some kind of leverage that its massive industrial productivity and big industrial companies, particularly its automobile industry, which was dominant in the world at that point, would be to find some kind of way in which to harness their productivity, their innovation, and to bring it to bear to make war material, to move from civilian production to military production. And my book, Freedom's Forge, is about how that process took place and the ways in which, in particular, one leading business executive, the CEO of General Motors, Bill Knudsen, was able to convince Roosevelt that the way to do this was to harness the energy of the private sector, the American private sector, and turn it loose to solve these problems now in the public sector, which was the military issues. How do you stop tanks? How do you build aircraft in the numbers with which Germany and Japan are able to assemble and to have that cutting edge technology, which we have to remember Germany and Japan had in 1940. The Messerschmitt 109, the Japanese Zero. This was leading edge technology. So
Well, let me
what we have,
ask you.
the difference we've got now is that we have advanced technology, maybe the best military technology in the world. But we don't have is an industrial base of the kind that emerged in World War II to produce the kind of war material. 2/3 of all the war material used by the Allies in the war came out of American factories and shipyards and facilities. We don't have that kind of industrial capacity to build for and prepare for any kind of a sustained conflict in any kind of way. And that's why everybody now recognizes that the United States industrial base, the one that was built during World War II, sustained through the Cold War, and that has now fallen into very, very hard times, that industrial base now has to gear up on a new basis, because we aren't the industrial power we were in 1940. We're not the industrial power we were in 1980. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to see the opposite take place. That in World War II, it was the America's industrial might that produced a military industrial complex the world had never seen before. What's going to happen now is that in the process of fixing our defense industrial base, companies like Cameron's are going to demonstrate for us how we reindustrialize the American economy and how we reshore American manufacturing again and bring that back into an important part of the American industry and American economy.
So it's part and parcel of that. It seems to me we're walking away from a trend over the last several decades where basically the intellectual property and design side was focused in the US and we let everybody else make it, right? That basically so what is the strategic vulnerability that we get if we were to maintain that system? How important to us is it to actually reshore? Because we invent the stuff to begin with, right? Yeah. How important is it to reshore it?
Well, I'll tell you what, I think we had two excellent hard lessons in what happens when you are dependent on foreign powers, particularly China, and foreign countries for your supply. One was with COVID, where we realized the degree to which all of our major healthcare products and pharmaceuticals were all being produced outside the United States. And that if China had gone through with the threat that some of their ministers had done of cutting the United States off from that supply, then we'd be in very, very serious trouble. The second one is the war in Ukraine. And what the war in Ukraine demonstrated was that we couldn't even supply the Ukrainians with enough conventional arms, like 155 millimeter artillery shells. I mean, that's a staple. That's been a staple since World War II of how you build artillery and firepower on the battlefield. We couldn't even sustain that and able to supply them and maintain our own stock and inventories. These two lessons drove home, number one, the importance of a defense industrial base that can produce weapons, even conventional ones, in large numbers, which we don't have and are trying to rebuild. But number two, the degree to which a loss of manufacturing, which took place all through the 1980s and into the 1990s, that process was disastrous for us in terms of national security, let alone in terms of what our economic future is going to look like.
Well, we also have to point out another lesson from Ukraine is that, while we can't make 155 at the rate we need to, it may be becoming obsolete due to drones. artillery is being
The
replaced
technology
rapidly.
is changing dramatically.
Yes.
But are we
Yeah.
behind in
And
drones as well?
and we can't build drones because all of the components are made in China.
Yeah, there you go.
It
And
is.
that's a big part of it too.
Are you facing that, Cameron, with your
Absolutely.
world?
I mean, the largest drone manufacturer for the Ukraine conflict is in El Segundo. It's run by a good friend, Soren. This is the company Neros. And their entire company has focused on trying to Americanize the supply chain. And he always has this great line. He said, there's two types of drone makers in the world: those that think that their drone has all American components, and those that have looked hard enough and understand that some component inside of it really does come from China. And it goes all the way down to the neodymium refinement. I mean, if you zoom out and look at the state of society, I mean, nobody my age wants to go into manufacturing. This is awful. We've told kids for so long that manufacturing is not what Americans should be working on. Wall Street created this idea of globalization. They said, no, that stuff is dull and dirty. You should really send that overseas. All of the power comes in design. And so we have a country that has a surplus of designers and a deficit in people who actually make real stuff nowadays. And all of these drone designers and folks you see, they're just designing, right? Like, who's actually making the parts? Where are the factories for these things? That's what this country needs right now.
Cameron, the one place that I would say, and I want to bring Rand in on this too, the one place where I do see that evidence of young people drawn to the manufacturing side is in space industry. And the kids who line up for a chance to work at SpaceX, which I understand is like a sort of industrial boot camp.
Yeah,
I mean, the hours you put in, the amount of the demands that are being placed on you from the CEO all the way down. People burn out after a couple of years, but boy, do you come out of that with a resume and with an experience and know-how that other companies will snatch up.
And what's really powerful about SpaceX is they vertically integrated into their supply chains, because the core issue that American defense firms have today is that they don't have durable supply chains to build on. There's no modern American company that does. Critical parts aren't being made for legacy systems, and they're not being made for new entrants. And so SpaceX had to pull themselves up and do it all. So we're seeing these firms come in and they vertically integrate into taking these technologies into their own hands, bringing machining centers in-house, bringing, bolt, all this stuff. But all the way down to the ground, there's a lift that needs to come back, because we're just seeing a gap, because we told Americans that it wasn't worth working on. And then
it wasn't just there was a supply chain for what they wanted to do. It just sucked. Because it was used to working for the government.
Right,
and,
cost plus.
It was cost plus, and they'll pay whatever, we tell them the costs. And Elon said, I'm trying to do low cost launch. We have to reduce the cost of our launch systems. And that's not just not throwing them away, though that was obviously very important, but we can't have this defense supply chain where they say, well, okay, we'll give it to you in 18 months, and it's going to cost you, 10 times or 100 times what when you sit down and figure out how much it cost. That's so they pulled, and this is back in the almost 20 years ago now when you first discovered this. So that's why they went so vertical, and they still run into problems when they outsource. I think I think one of their COPV problems, or a tank blew up because they didn't build it in-house. They bought it from somebody else.
There's something
the difference with World War II. Get back to Joel's original question here of where we are vis-a-vis where we were in 1940, 1941. And it's important to realize that we were on track to outproduce the Axis and outproduce Nazi Germany, certainly, by the time the bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor. That's what Bill Knudsen was able to accomplish in that year and a half before America actually went to war. The big advantage we have today, which we did not have at all then, is we have this amazing array of advanced defense technology and weapon systems. Whether you're talking about the F-35, whether you're talking about what we have in terms of hypersonics, in terms of unmanned systems, we have use of AI, all this panoply of technologies which are available and that could give us, and then in some areas do give us an advantage. And I'll include space in that too. with companies like SpaceX. I mean, what a resource, what an asset to have from a national security point of view, a company like that. The big disadvantage we have, and both Rand and Cameron touched on this, is in World War II we had our own supply chain. We didn't have global supply chain. Whatever we needed, whatever we wanted, was all within the 48 states. I mean, there were some rare, rare earths and exotic materials like tungsten that had to be imported from South America. But generally speaking, copper, aluminum, steel, oil, everything that you would sort of need that was key for the supply chains for making tanks, for making artillery pieces, for making trucks, and for making airplanes. All of that was produced by from domestic sources.
Yeah, but something else we had in World War II that we don't have now, and it gets back to the skills issue, is we had a lot of farm kids who grew up fixing tractors, and so you send them off to war, and they're fixing airplanes. We don't have that, now hardly anybody works on a farm anymore.
So the nature of the people is quite different.
That was one of the key advantages we had against the Axis powers, because they didn't. I mean, we always think about Nazi Germany as being an industrialized power. It really was not when Hitler took it to war. Something like 1/3 of its economy was still agriculturally based. And for young German kids in the Wehrmacht, driving a truck was a brand new experience. They had never had this opportunity. U.S. GIs, they had grown up with Model Ts, they had grown up with Chevrolets, with all the other tools that the auto industry had produced for the commercial sector. That gave them that kind of experience and direction. But one thing I would say about, which we haven't talked about yet, though Cameron, I thought, touched on it, was the issue of workforce.
Well, that's
And it's important to remember that, yes, it's true, we did have a massive industrial workforce in World War II in 1940 who were available and trained and had the new know-how to work on assembly lines, to work in mass production. But you also have to remember that a big chunk of that workforce went off to war. They were drafted, or they volunteered and enlisted the Marines or whatever. And so all through it, and I talk about this in the Freedom's Forge in the chapters about what happens when these companies, including Henry Kaiser's Liberty Ships companies and his shipyards in Richmond, they're scraping the bottom of the barrel to try and find workers here. There was an enormous shortage of trained workers, of any people who could do this kind of work. And so the companies basically had to take people off the street and say, look, if you'll work for the wages we're paying, we'll teach you your job. And we'll teach you how to do your job, and you'll be able to earn a living, and you'll learn a skill you can use later on here too. And they had to bring in women. That was a huge part of the change. And they had to bring in African Americans at the same time because they needed bodies as this explosion of wartime production got underway.
Well, so they needed to bring in new management practices that people probably were not used to, right? Most people were kind of used to individual activity, not necessarily synchronized in a mechanical kind of a way, but with the desire to scale up the production, you had to synchronize people. You had to teach them new ways and new methods of operating. And you also had to mimic the military world that they were in so that it kind of was able to move products seamlessly from the civilian to the military world.
And you know what? And they had a accelerated time frame in which to do that. Be able to sort of teach a young woman to be a welder, working in the Richmond shipyards, and you had a couple months in which she would have to be good enough to be able to apprentice to somebody who did it on a professional basis. I guess my point is that the workforce issue, which is one you always bump into in discussions about defense industrial base, or also about real industrialization, don't you think, Joel, I mean, this is always the question. What are we going to, Americans won't work. We've got all these kinds of problems. World War II, we faced very similar difficulties and obstacles. The difference is that people like Henry Kaiser, the founders who went into World War II production, they saw these workforce challenges not as obstacles that needed government support and government help. They saw it as opportunities. We're going to go find the workforce, and we'll be able to expand our facilities and be able to produce more and produce faster and cheaper. And so,
Yeah,
I just want
to.
I'm gonna jump in just because this is my life.
Right. No, I'm very
Is
interested in how do you deal with that situation in El Segundo, California, right
that's
now?
a good question.
Well, it's a new world of technology. So we talked about this technology. The F-35 has the most advanced American technology in it. What do American factories look like? What do the factories look like that were responsible for building these things? So I'll tell you, look at the incentives. What we did with globalization is we said everything that's not DoD critical can go overseas. And so what went overseas with all the free markets? Manufacturing innovation. And manufacturing innovation, who has the most advanced factories? Who has the most advanced workforce industrial base? Who's got the biggest workforce industrial base? It's all China today. And this is, I get heat for saying this, but I've been to China. I've seen their advanced manufacturing facilities, at least the ones that they show publicly, and it is impressive. And it makes sense because that's where all the money is going into the industry. I'm a factory builder. We're trying to build the most advanced factory for the modern American workforce. What I try to do is take a sober look at who can do this today, and we say, how do we mobilize tens or hundreds of thousands of Americans? And the truth is, what you have to do is you have to make the technology more digital. You have to let people use laptops to do the work of what once was a bunch of humans. And this is, of course, robotics. And I'm a career roboticist. And when I look at some of the historical innovations that have proven that this has been the case, just to kind of put a frame around it, you look at the CNC machine. So back before CNC happened, it was just machining centers. And it was some really skilled, consistent humans spinning wheels to drag a drill bit across a block of metal and chisel out a finished part. And this took a lot of time and a lot of expertise. And then someone figured out what you could do is put motors on those pieces of equipment and program a computer to spin those motors. And then the human's still doing it, they're programmed, but it's leveraged through a system. And now you can have 20 machining centers that are CNCs that a single human is doing the work for. So the question is, how do we do this for a whole factory? And how do we do this for all the manufacturing processes? Manufacturing is when you really double click into it, there are hundreds of processing. You have coatings, paintings, machining, which we talked about, foundry work, forging, and all of this stuff is in the same place.
And what is your supply chain? What is your supply chain for that new digital world producing analog products, in essence, right? Physical products.
Yep.
What does your supply chain for that look like? I've got to believe it's still heavily reliant upon China for things like chips, control systems for the software. Tell us about that.
Yeah, great question. Because the factory is the product. And so we are trying to design the F-35 of a factory. And the question is, when I go to build that and I say I need the most advanced vacuum induction melting system in the world, or I need the most advanced furnace or 3D printer, it's tough. Those aren't American firms. And if you do find American firms making them and you ask to buy 1,000 of them because you need to ramp up, we need capacity as a country, they don't have a supply chain. I mean, it's turtles all the way down. We have issues all the way down to our ingots. We take sand, we take sand and we take raw ingots, and we use lithography and a bunch of smart stuff to shape them together into a metal part. But the truth is, even the elements inside of that raw ingot may not come from China. They might come from Brazil. They might come from another country, as Arthur was talking about earlier. But we are a connected world. There's no question about it. And it's going to take a long time to bring it back. There can be some amazing American industrialists. It will not take 1.5 years to bring all of this stuff back here. We are just not structured. We are reliant on these things. And we have to be very strategic about our partnerships to ensure that critical components of the supply chain remain in a place where America can project its power. Because we've learned very recently that a nation that can't produce is a nation that can't project power.
Well, can
Have
you get
been to
there
Korea and
without a
Japan as
crisis?
well?
Can you get there without a crisis? Right? World War II, we had an imminent, clear crisis in front of us that accelerated the curve of how quickly we could domesticize the supply chain and get our own processes in order. Do we have the same level of crisis out there today?
Well,
Can you do it without a crisis?
I'll tell you this, and I think this is one of the lessons that comes out of the close reading of Freedom's Forge is that when Roosevelt and Knudsen and the other dollar a year men, as they were called, came together to organize and to turn the U.S. industrial machine into a war production machine, that we weren't at war. It was a year and a half before anything happened on a Sunday morning in Pearl Harbor. And in fact, by and large, the general attitude in the country at the time was, we don't want to be going to war. It was very much influenced by isolationist sentiments. The America First, Charles Lindbergh outlook was very pervasive across the country. And you also had a political issue, and that is that most of Knudsen's colleagues in the business world were Republicans. They hated FDR. They saw this as, they were really worried, is this just another extension of the New Deal, of a way of taking over the American economy and moving it from a free market capitalist economy towards a quasi-socialist one. So it was a lot of uphill work by Knudsen and his colleagues to get Americans to sign on to the preparing for war in this kind of way. Now, of course, once after December 1941 and after 1942, yes, you did have this incredible sense of national unity and of national urgency as well that you were able to pull together. But the great secret, in my view, the great secret to an offset strategy when it comes to the relationship between strategy and a defense industrial base, an offset, leveraging the advantage that you have that your opponents don't have. That in what Bill Knudsen understood is that our capacity for mass production was our offset to the advantage that the Germans and the Japanese enjoyed in terms of cutting edge military technology and doctrine for waging modern mechanized war. That we could basically produce more planes and tanks that they could blow up or shoot down. That was our offset. Today, I think we have an offset when you don't have to go to war. And today that offset is our advanced technologies. And our advanced technologies, including AI, including robotics, including, I think, also quantum technology, which hasn't even really been seen as the kind of advantage it could bring to bear here. That these sorts of advanced technologies are our offset, and we're just getting started in thinking about how those play into not just reshaping our economy and reindustrializing it, which is an important goal, but also of how these become key strategic advantages in dealing with a potential foe like China.
Well, what about, but the question I guess is, where is the workforce going to come from? I look at the students, I look at what's coming out of the high schools. Like, for instance, Cameron, when you're looking for machinists or skilled workers of one kind or another, where do you find them? Because, you know, the particularly in California, we've done a very bad job, I think, of skills training. So
you find
what do you
them
do?
as baristas. You find them as quantitative traders. Our production team has never worked in a foundry before, and their training and the machines that they interface with is part of the technology. We have to solve this with technology. That's what Arthur's saying. But we have to put technology in play against this problem. They're not there. You're 100% right. We don't have 100,000 foundrymen to go to work in America. It's not there. What we do have is a bunch of people that are good at using laptops and that think about the digital world in an interesting way. The trick is putting technology into a factory in such a way that unlocks the resource that is the modern American workforce. But my other hope is that I hope our American workforce gets a lot better. We really need to be serious about training more welders, creating more trade schools, and then incentivizing jobs like those. It's absolutely ridiculous that leaving college, all of my smart engineering friends wanted to pivot to software engineering so that they could go make Adobe a little bit more money so you can edit and look at a PDF easier. Like, how in the world did the most valuable thing for the American engineer, to be, was to get me to look at my phone more because my attention is the most valuable thing that Americans think exists today? It's crazy. That's what we've built as a country, and that's where all the money is. And I really hope that changes. I hope that the physical world.
So you have to gamify. You have to gamify the manufacturing process so that people will enjoy playing it all day long.
And,
right.
and Peter Thiel has been complaining about this for years. He's saying, we're not building real things.
How does Elon do it? I mean, he must have huge numbers of engineers, and I'm very interested because of my association with the University of Texas, with all the things that they're building in Texas in terms of manufacturing and liftoff. How did he get around that?
He's a bit of a crazy man. And because we have folks, they're the best people to hire. Half of our team, all of our senior team is all SpaceX directors. Like, it's like I always joke. I say SpaceX is like a graduate school for a high agency person now. All the graduate schools are teaching how to do some information abstraction, and SpaceX is teaching people how to make stuff in the real world, and they're churning them out like crazy. And this is why El Segundo is so powerful. I mean, the elephant in the room is that there's an insane university called SpaceX down the street that's teaching Americans how to make stuff in a crazy way.
Yeah, interesting
and Elon doesn't care about credentials.
No.
Absolutely doesn't care about credentials. He, basically,
it also mitigates in favor of a lack of remote work, right? If you're the whole notion that SpaceX is right down the street from Gundo and that people can go back and forth, it's a physical proximity as opposed to a virtual proximity that makes that whole system work. But I have a question for Rand on this, and this may be a useful thing. We've been talking a little bit about the importance of reindustrializing in order to be able to meet today's warfare issues, today's defense issues. Rand, you're so focused on space as the next frontier for conflict among nations and among powers in the world. How does this impact, this reshoring impact the space side of this?
Well, it's working on the commercial side, clearly. The Pentagon's recognizing they have a big procurement problem in terms of how long it takes to get a program, going and actually have hardware coming out the other end. I mean, look at how long it took F-35 to happen. I guess the problem is getting back to, do we need a crisis? There's no urgency in Congress about whether or not China beats us to the moon. I mean, they'll say there is, but they don't act like there is. And I just put out a study by the Reason Foundation a couple weeks ago that says, it is possible, but they have to stop looking at civil space as a jobs program. And because that's not how you reindustrialize. You don't spend money. You don't do things to spend money. You spend money to do things, as Bob Zubrin says.
Well, and you've talked a lot about our vulnerability in space from killer satellites, from other countries, notably China, gearing up to kind of take away our communication strategic advantage that comes by having all of these satellites. I guess that's not crisis enough in the mind of the government.
Well, I think that, again, the Pentagon is waking up, but NASA doesn't care. And it's kind of funny because every time, we talk about the proximity of El Segundo and Hawthorne, right? And how people are working together. And it drove Elon crazy not to have people coming into work. Because that's how you make things happen, is you interact with it, and you can't do it on Zoom. You need to be there. But NASA's philosophy has always been, we need to spread the work out among as many states as possible to get political support for it. So you have a lot of them. I mean, Southern California lost human spaceflight until Elon brought it back. It lost human spaceflight in the 90s because NASA said, "Okay, Downey and Huntington Beach, we want you. California people cost too much, and we want to move you to Houston or to Huntsville or to the Cape." So all of human spaceflight basically left Southern California where it was born. Because we did Apollo here, they did the Apollo capsule in Downey,
Yeah.
and I was on a radio show with Born Only,
Oh, yeah.
15 years ago, with Elon, and I said, and it's funny because I said, Elon's brought. I said the same thing. Elon has brought spaceflight back to Southern California, but he's not going to keep it here. He's going to leave. And Elon's, no, I love California. I'll never leave California. And of course, along comes COVID and Tesla and all that. I said, California, I'm out of here. And he moved. I think SpaceX headquarters is no longer in Hawthorne. I mean, they're still building a lot of stuff there, but I think he moved it to Texas.
He did.
Yeah, and he's building this gigantic star base, and they're putting money into Bowstrip.
But there is something about California, something about Southern California, even El Segundo, that has some magic associated with it that is positive in this whole space defense world. Go ahead.
Same thing that brought that industry here in the first place. It's the weather and the scenery, and it's if it wasn't for the government that sucks, it would still be the best place on the planet.
Right. All of us who are Southern Californians will agree with that.
Well, I guess that puts me as the outsider.
You're the outsider.
Right. But as we wrap up, Joel, do you have a final question?
No, what I'd really like to get a sense is, where do you think things are going in the next year or two? I mean, does the Trump administration, is it any kind of improvement over what we had before? Is there some consciousness that this is the great challenge facing the country? I'd like to just get all of your views on that.
I'll tell you what, I'll mention one other great advantage America had during World War II, and that is that none of its major industrial companies were headed by an MBA.
Harvard Business School.
Everybody who was,
that's why they all went broke after the war. Just sort of plug in for MBAs.
All headed by people who had grown up in the industry and had worked their way into the executives. But in World War II, we also had, if you like, there was a serpent in the garden, if you put it that way, and there was a group of 10 men by the name it was called the Whiz Kids, and the Whiz Kids were brought in from Harvard Business School, basically to help the Air Force control its supply chain. Sound familiar? To figure out in logistics.
Yeah, McNamara was one of those guys.
McNamara was foremost.
After the war,
that's when we started losing wars.
They went into first Ford Motor Company, but then their outlook, their view, which is that if you can't measure it, it's not of interest, and it doesn't really exist. And that approach then infected the American business world, and then, thanks to Robert McNamara, became part of the Defense Department mindset, even down to this day. I spent the last 2 years working with the Congressional Commission on Pentagon budget reform, and helped them to write their interim and also their final report with it. And that mindset, that view, and about the way in which how you measure success in terms of numbers, in terms of metrics, and that is the view of what it is the Defense Department should be about, which is saving money and preserving the budgets for certain departments from year to year, or even increasing them. That is so embedded into a large part of the mindset at the Pentagon, and the way in which it looks upon companies like, whether it's Cameron's, how they talk about space industry, the issue, the companies that Rand is talking about here. It's very much seen through the same lens that Robert McNamara saw the world back in 1962. Yeah. And what I think the big change that can happen here with Trump is we move from a world of business that's dominated not by MBAs but by engineers and by founders. My new book, the book that'll be out next spring, is on founders, founders of American history, American business, the founder culture, which is so essential to how America, and what we call American exceptionalism, and that the role that founders play in shaping and moving in American dynamism is, I think, one of the things that the second Trump administration, I think, will come to recognize is absolutely necessary if we're going to turn around all of these problems: defense industrial base, our reindustrializing, and reshoring our critical industries and supply chains.
Yeah, I could not agree with you more. You know, the idea of founder mentality is all about fast failure. How do I get out there, innovate, try something, find out quickly it doesn't work, and move to the next thing?
And look at the title of Rand's book. I mean, that's exactly how founders see the world.
Right.
And that is that it's about risk management. And that if you don't take risk, then there's no opportunities. And that became so ingrained in the kind of the business school view of the world, the Harvard Business School view of the world, and also in government bureaucracies, that this was the big challenge that Elon and Donald Trump faced, was trying to clean all of that out and get all of that from Doge all the way down to Pentagon reforms and changes as well.
Yeah, when you move from a focus on efficiency to a focus on innovation, the entire metric system changes. I completely agree with you on that. Rand, you were going to say something?
Well, I was going to say, as I said earlier, the Pentagon does recognize this. There's some people at the Pentagon recognize this. You can, I go over to SpaceWorks occasionally in El Segundo, because they're working very hard to figure out how do we get these small startups over that valley of death from this, these SBR 1s and 2s into something where there's serious money, and they're trying to figure out a way to, and they're figuring out ways to do that, and that's going to be really important.
Those 2 years, we spent a lot of time talking about just that issue, valley of death. How do you overcome it? And how do you, they're confronting the problem. I don't know if they found any real answers yet, but at least they know it's a serious, serious problem.
Well, they're making it easier for small companies to get money, and but again, NASA and this administration is clearly not yet serious about civil space. I mean, they tossed Isaacman overboard the day before he was going to be confirmed. He would have been a great administrator, because somebody in the White House didn't like the fact that he gave some money to Democrats. We still don't know when we're going to get a new administrator. We don't know when we're going to have a space council, even though Newt went in and told Trump 2 or 3 months ago, we need a space council. Vance has not been focused on that, but even though it's his job, it's in the law, says the vice president in charge of the space council. So they're working, and Duffy's a good guy, smart guy, but he's wearing too many hats, and frankly, I'm sorry, he doesn't know which end the fire comes out of when it comes to space. and we need a new NASA administrator, and I've heard names that'll be great if they can get them. General Quast, General Shaw would be great, but right now we're completely rudderless in civil space, and we are, Eric, senior moment, space reporter at Ars Technica, Eric Berger, just had this week said, China's going to beat us to the moon. Yeah. And Jimmy Petticookis had something on that today on X. Said, it looked like, and what this recent study I just put out was that doesn't have to be, but we have to make dramatic changes in the way we're doing things, and one of them is stop wasting money on NASA's giant rocket, which, by the way, China is not copying NASA. They are copying SpaceX.
Yeah, of course. One final question. Cameron, are you finding that as an entrepreneur, that you're getting the kind of government support that both Rand and Art were alluding to, that you're getting military people, military contracts that you might not have gotten in the past?
Yeah, it's a hard question. I go to DC a lot, and I think there's a lot of weight to move. I think there's a lot of inertia. I think people not so sure what matters, and there's a lot of people in a lot of ears. I'm a founder, and I've spent the past 3 years of my life trying to build the next generation of American factories. It doesn't dissuade me. I want to know how William Knudsen did it. If I could have a conversation with him and his friends,
Right.
I'd like that very much. But until then, watch this drive.
Well, gentlemen,
this
thank
has been
you so much.
fantastic.
This has been a really fascinating conversation. And we're obviously in a very fluid world. And it's great to have three great minds like yours helping our listeners make sense of it. So thank you very much for being on the Feudal Future podcast.
The feudal future.